Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
Thank you, Kenneth Gale. If only there were only love. And in our teaching, in our understanding, there is only love. The Course in Miracles says, teach only love, for that is what you are. So there's a lot going on in the world that appears not to be love, yes? And how we approach that is important, and I want to talk about that later in this message, but I had already set up a four-part series that we're going to be exploring on our spiritual practices, so I want to be true to our practice, and today we're talking about meditation. So I'll come back to how we bring that love into the struggles in this world. A young woman was on a job interview, and at one point during the interview, the potential boss said, so can you tell me, would you describe yourself as a hard worker? And her eyes got wide, and she said, oh, yes. My last boss told me I make everything harder than it has to be. Do you recognize that? When we're approaching our spiritual practices, we often make it harder than it has to be. So today we're talking about meditation. Next week we're talking about prayer. Then we're going to talk about service as a spiritual practice. We're going to talk about the unity teaching on affirmation and denial. And then on the fifth week we're going to talk about generosity as a spiritual practice. We think sometimes that it's the spiritual masters who sit in meditation chanting Om all day. They're the ones who really have the spiritual practice down. And some of us who struggle to meditate, we think, well, maybe this just isn't for me because I don't have that level of consciousness or awareness to just be in that Zen space, whatever that is, that feeling of just constant knowing of our oneness and connection. And so I want to offer you about this whole month series is that, sometimes slipshod is good enough. Sometimes getting it half right is better than nothing. You don't have to be perfect to practice these wonderful ways of connection. As a matter of fact, it is our perfection that keeps us from trying. So I'm just going to ask you to turn to somebody and say, however you do it is good enough. Go ahead. Turn to somebody else. We probably need to hear this a couple of times. However you do it is good enough. Now, we've got some permission granted here, right? Meditation is not some big scary thing. So what I know about these spiritual practices is that you don't have to be perfect. We have our purpose and values we've been working with really for about a year. And I think it was last summer that we finally got them in form that we love. And last week I talked, I'm not going to have them on the screen today, but I want to remind you that we have the three values, being, becoming, and belonging. Being speaks about our oneness with God and with each other, with all life, that we are part of the infinite stream of divine creative energy and love. Becoming is the way that we reveal that through space and time in our lives. And then belonging speaks to the fact that we do it in community. We do it together. So I want to focus a little bit on the being statement, which says this: through practice and through grace, we heal and grow, revealing the Christ within. Through practice and through grace, we heal and grow, revealing the Christ. The Christ is... Christ was not Jesus' last name. I don't know if you knew that. It's a Greek word, Christos, which meant anointed one, Messiah. And that knowing of being anointed, of being elevated to God consciousness, that's in all of us. Jesus knew it. He knew his connection. And he said this over and over again, that the kingdom of heaven is within us. and that greater things would those do who come after him. He never, this idea that Jesus was the great exception rather than the great example, he never taught that. That was taught after. And it has this tendency to keep us stuck. Well, I'll never be that. I'll never be that ascended master. I'll never be that. I'm just stuck here in my poor little, should I talk about the worm eating again? I'm just going to go in the garden and eat worms. I think that's God saying, don't say that again. No. Hopefully we'll get that handled. So what we're here to do is through practice and through grace, all month long we're going to talk about what it means to practice acting as if we are who Jesus said we are. Acting as if we are that presence of love in human form. Acting as if that we are aligned with the truth of possibility and hope and overcoming and transformation rather than aligned and identified with our struggles and with our limited nature and with our suffering. Which do you think sounds better, right? Let's start acting as though we are who God says we are. That we are one with this infinite power of creativity. Meditation, what is it? Oh, one more thing I want to say before I get into that is that all of the practices, not only do they align us in the moment with a truth of greater reality, that if we might feel like we want to just, go tear stuff up and just, judge and curse and do all these things against humanity. But if we stop and sit in the silence, we don't do those things. In the moment, we are putting our actions in line with a greater truth. But there's also a cumulative effect. The more we practice, the longer we continue to do this, we change over time. We get better. I've often said that, and it still feels true, so I'm going to say it again, that there's nothing that has changed my experience of life more than getting sober, because I have a history of alcohol addiction, and that was the thing that changed my experience of life. The second thing that changed more than anything else is a practice of meditation. I have a very active mind. And sometimes it can be a little reactive. Anybody relate to that? When something happens, I'm right here. And what meditation has given me is like a 2-second, hold on, just a little gap before I react, a cumulative. And believe me, I have not done it perfectly. I still don't do meditation perfectly, but I still do it. And the longer I practice it, the more it just gives me a little bit of a space before I react, that I get to choose my response rather than just act. And of course, I always say it, but the Graduate School of Spirituality is on the freeways in Houston. This is where it's really put to the test. Do we have a little bit of peace before we flare? Meditation will give us this. It's a gentle focus of the mind. You are not your mind. You have a mind, but you are not your mind. That may be news to some of you. But you are not your mind. And it is that the ability to step back into a little bit of an observer space that we can actually watch our thoughts. And then we can actually choose our thoughts. This is really the point of it. And there are so many techniques and modalities and teachings around how to do it, and they all work if you practice them. I tend to like the smorgasbord approach. There's a wonderful book by Ram Dass. It's called The Journey of Awakening, and it is, if you have a chance to get it, it's available on Kindle. I don't know if it's still in print, in paperback or not. I should have asked our bookstore manager. I didn't know I was going to talk about it until about 5 o'clock this morning. But it is a wonderful book, and he talks about different techniques. You begin with a candle gazing meditation. There's breath meditation. There's mantra meditation. All of these wonderful ideas, just simple ways, tools to begin to slow down that monkey mind, to disconnect it a little bit and just be present in a gentle focus. It doesn't feel like it would change that much. It changes everything. It changes our whole experience of living in these human bodies, living on this human earth. It changes everything. This is what Ram Dass writes in the introduction to the book. Disillusioned by the hollowness of success, some of us have sought fulfillment in revolution, others in dropping out. I think he's dating the book right there. Others in trying to milk more and more gratification from our environment. And some of us have sought a solution to our problems in other cultures, philosophies, or religions. For me, this search took me from being a psychology professor at Harvard through experimentation with LSD and other psychedelics. You do not have to say you've been on that path. I'm not going to ask you to identify yourself. And finally, to the Himalayas in India. There I came to understand that I would have to approach my inner being directly to find a lasting answer. Meditation has been the best way to do this. There are innumerable meditative techniques deriving from many philosophers and philosophies and religions. Over the past years, I have sought training in and practiced a variety of these, and I've profited greatly from each. The inner experiences of these past years have changed the perception and meaning of the daily events of my life. Achievement, sexual desire, anger, boredom, pleasure, money, relationships, work, and play. I no longer feel that one part of me is fighting another. I experience an integrity in my being that includes the deepest as well as the most superficial. More of the time, the moment, no matter what I am doing, is permeated with space, peace, equanimity, joy, and lightness. I can't think of a better description of what meditation achieves for us. To stop fighting against ourselves. Instead of being constantly pulled, I think about it sometimes like my experience before I began to meditate was like sort of having a ring in my nose and being led around in the world. Something would happen in the world and I would just be drawn. I didn't have any sort of control of where my consciousness went. I was just led by the external world. And when I began to practice, something in me just could sit. I love that he said, the more the time is permeated with space. The word I love is spaciousness. That life becomes more open and spacious. There are a lot of studies on it. It's now become fairly mainstream. I listen to an evangelical Christian minister who does a podcast on leadership. He's a meditator. When I was growing up in the evangelical church, meditators was, that was like, you didn't want to get those people were kind of out there. It's everywhere now. That this practice of stilling the mind is becoming so mainstream. It's prescribed by doctors. And it has absolute wonderful benefits in your health. Stress is probably the leading cause of the inflammation in our bodies, which causes so many medical disorders. And if we can calm the mind, it relieves our stress. And the body is not always flowing with stress hormones and causing us to gain weight and causing all of these things. Now, I'm not telling you that it solves every problem in your life. But I will tell you, it will give you a better shot at taking care of the things that are asking for your attention. How do you do it? Well, there's so many ways, and I think it's best to get a teacher. Karen just taught a 5-week class on meditation here. We do that often. YouTube is a great repository now of meditation teachers and techniques. You can buy books. I mentioned the Ram Dass book, The Journey of Awakening. It's wonderful. But it really doesn't matter where you start. It matters that you start if you're new to this. You just begin to research, find a meditation class. But I'll tell you, a real simple technique is to simply sit for 5 minutes and just breathe. We do it in service, not for that full 5 minutes in the stillness, but just do that. Give yourself 5 minutes to start. Set the timer on your phone. I tend to be a person who... I'm a Taurus. I don't know why. People tell me that's why I'm like this, but I like the incense, I like the candle, I like the music. I like to create an atmosphere that for my mind signals this time is set apart. This is not my normal busy to-do list life. I have created a little space where I'm doing something different. It's sacred, it's special, It reminds me. And so as my mind wanders during, and I usually do 20 minutes is my typical meditation nowadays. When my mind wanders, as it does every single time I have set to meditate, my mind has wandered. Every single time. Thousands of times I've meditated, the mind always wanders for me. So people think that if your mind wanders, you're not doing it right. No, you are. But if I can smell the incense, hear the music, hear the bell, I will come back. So the point of the practice is we keep coming back. Keep coming back. And what happens is that thing that's like a tightly wound spring inside of us just begins to unwind a little bit. Just begins to relax and let go. Our shoulders drop. Our belly becomes less tight. We can just be. How many of you know that we walk around with judgment? The inner critic, mine actually lives right here. Just, well, you know, you oughta. How can you be? That inner critic gets a vacation during meditation. Oh, no, believe me, he will try. She will try and tell you how you're doing it wrong, and you really ought to be better at this by now. My gosh, you've been going to Unity for 30 years and you still can't meditate? It will give you all of that. But I invite you to let it go, to let it go on vacation. Just trust that you're doing just fine. Our minds get so filled, and we live in a time where, boy, we get stimulation all the time, do we not? And I'm guilty of it. Sitting at dinner last night with John, I watched him pick up his phone first. I got mine, and I looked at my text messages, and I just got involved. My mind is always looking to connect and stimulate it and be. So I know you know that. Maybe not all of you do that. I'm really wanting to not do that as much. But my mind will seek to fill itself with the news of the day, with the politics, with a to-do list, all the things I need to be changing and fixing in my life. All of that stuff, my mind will just get full. Just full. And in all that clutter that's taking residence in my mind, I sometimes forget the truth of who I am. That beautiful song that Kenneth sang for us. There's only love. Somebody wrote a song with that title too. It was me. I did that. Anyway. Underneath all of the stuff that occupies our minds, there is this space. And in that space, we can become aware of the deepest nature of reality. God, by definition, must be omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. This is agreed upon by most philosophies and religions, that if it's God, it has to be all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present. Because otherwise, there's like God, and then there's other stuff over here. Well, what was that made out of? So there's a oneness of reality that we understand God to be. There's also a word that I've heard added sometimes. We definitely embrace this in Unity. God is also omnibenevolent. All good. All good. So when we can begin to get underneath the clutter of our thinking, we can come to rest in this space, and that space is not empty. That space, although it is often described in Eastern religion as being formless, it is not empty. It's good. It's good. And so you can relax and let God be God in this world. Because underneath all of the activity and all of the insanity that we're seeing, there is good. And it is also described as love. That God, this good, must give. It must reveal and express itself through form. And so underneath all of the judgment and self-criticism and busyness and all that stuff in your life, you are loved. Loved, cherished, all the time. That you are simply being bathed with this divine love. I say it almost every week, it seems like, but we live in in some ways the most connected generation of our planet's history, of our species' history, with all of our electronic media and the internet. We're just so connected, and then we're also so isolated. On Friday, we witnessed a horrific act in Virginia Beach where a man took 2 guns, walked into the place where he had worked, and shot 11 people. He himself was killed. How many times do I have to stand up here and talk about a mass shooting? I don't even know how to do it. I have to address it, right? And yet, we become numb to it because how many have we seen? And I will say that this is a uniquely American affliction. This does not happen in other cultures. It's something that's going on here, where there is some thinking in our collective consciousness as a culture that is so cluttered and wrongly identified an error that it creates these kind of events over and over again. Nobody else is experiencing this in the way that we do here. And it's like, how do I talk about that on a day we're supposed to be talking about meditation? But then I remembered something. I did the research last night. Do you remember the Maharishi? He's an Eastern teacher who was bringing meditation to the West, and the Beatles were with him. But he taught this idea called TM, Transcendental Meditation. And I have a friend in sobriety who called it prayer for atheists. There's no doctrine or dogma attached. It's just a simple and dedicated practice of meditation. In the 1993, the Transcendental Meditation Organization decided to do an experiment. They wanted to go into one of the highest crime neighborhoods in America and have people meditate for a period of, I think it was 4 weeks. And this was set up to be an experiment to see what would happen. They had a goal of creating a 20% drop in the crime rate for those 4 weeks. They went to Washington, D.C., in the inner city, and they actually met with the chief of police in Washington, and he said, "You're crazy." He said the only time we would ever see a drop in crime in that period would be if there was a debilitating snowstorm. You're not going to see that. But they decided to try. And so they began with about 800 individuals, and they kept inviting people to join in the meditation. They ended up with 4,000 people. Some of you know what happened. There was a 23% reduction in crime while this happened. It's called the Maharishi effect. When we heal our own consciousness, it transmits. Do you hear me? Each of us is connected. We are not only connected to the infinite that is God, but we are also connected as the noosphere of human consciousness. All human beings are connected in a particular way. And when we heal our own consciousness, we get rid of our own stinking thinking and wrong identities. When we begin to sit in that spaciousness of the being of God as who we are, something happens in the field. We transmit this peace and this well-being. So you are invited to dip into this practice of meditation, however poorly, and I'm just going to say it, as half-assed as you do it. Just do it and know that it's good enough and it begins to change something in the world. A healing is being asked for in our culture. And then the last thing I want to say, I have a new song I'm going to share with you in just a minute. I just couldn't wait, and then it ended up fitting perfectly with what I want to talk about today. But Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." If we're allowing the outside information to dictate how we think we are and what we think the world is, we are being conformed. And we will see, well, the world is a scary place, it's violent, you can't trust people, that's what we will do. But if instead we renew our minds through the practice of meditation, we come to be transformed. And we see that we are not the thermometer, we are the thermostat. we begin to raise the consciousness. And it doesn't mean that we just sit on our cushion and we never take action in the world. It doesn't mean that. The greatest social justice, the greatest change, the greatest transformation of human culture has been when people have gotten the truth of who they are in God, and they bring that out into the legal system, the political system, all of those things. We begin to transform human culture. And if you don't believe that it's happened, there's a verse in Leviticus that says that if your son offends you, you take him before the elders of the church, and you can, if they say so, you can stone him to death. That was civil rights legislation of its time. Before that, if a father wanted to kill his son, he could do so because he was property. But this was a codification that no, first you have to go to the elders. That was, to us, feels very barbaric, but that was an earlier stage of human consciousness on how we deal with violence in our culture. We are at a new stage where we're getting information. We have to be different. We have to be different. Now, what is calling to us? And if more of us spend time in this deep connection to the infinite love of the One, how beautiful will our action in the world be? I know some of you are struggling with how to be in this world when we see these events, and we're struggling with the troubles in our own lives. I want to leave you with this idea that beneath all of that struggle is a deep connection with infinite love, infinite good. The nature of reality is God, is love, is peace. It's who you are. It's a new song written by my friend Jeff Ferguson and myself. God is love, moving within you. God is peace, living in me. God is here. Breathe in the glory. Hear the hope, see the grace, feel the touch. God is love. When life has a question, our heart knows the answer to every closed door. We hold the key. Open your soul. There is a river flowing forever, abundant and free. God is love, moving within you. God is peace, living in me. God is here. Breathe in the glory. Hear the hope, see the grace, feel the touch. God is love. When fear tries to blind you and dark clouds surround you, love has a voice that can calm every storm. Open your arms, love those around you. Here in this moment, your healing is born. God is love, moving within you. God is peace, living in me. God is here. Breathe in the glory. Hear the hope, see the grace, feel the touch. God is
hope, see the grace, feel the touch. Hear the hope, see the grace, feel the touch. God is love.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.